Wendigo is strong, but I have my magic gun. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. I was 13 years old. I was home alone because my parents went out for the night. Which is good. They haven't been out in a while. My dad is an engineer for bridge construction and my mum is a doctor. We just moved away from the city into a more suburban area. It was an older house, but a nice older house. We have been at the new house a month or so, and my dad just got finished with the biggest project he has been on and wanted to take my mum out for a celebration. I was in my room reading, and my dad knocked on the door and came into my room. My dad asked, "Are you gonna be okay by yourself tonight?" "Yeah, a whole house to myself and eat whatever I want and stay up late?" "Of course, I'm gonna be okay," I told my dad, gleaming. "Well, don't be up too late. Me and you are gonna go out tomorrow to celebrate just us," he said. I gave my dad a thumbs up and saluted him. He smiled and went back downstairs to head out with Mom. I went back to reading a book I just got from the school library. It was a book on Native American legends. I'm a massive nerd on mythology and folk tales. Naturally, I started picking my school library apart to find more books. I looked at the clock on my nightstand and it said 7:45 p.m. I decided I will read for another 15 minutes, then go get a snack. After reading a little longer than planned, I finally got to a good stopping point. Putting my book down and got out of bed to stretch. I heard a weird noise from downstairs. I didn't pay too much attention to it, figured it would be the house making noise as houses do. I started to head down the hall to the stairs. I reached the stairs, dread came over me. My dad didn't leave any lights on when they left. I have a tremendous fear of the dark when I'm alone. I use Christmas lights in my room when I go to bed so I don't freak myself out if I wake up in the middle of the night. I started walking down the hallway that seemed longer in the dark. Finally reaching the top of the stairs. I stared into the dark abyss. Trying to let my eyes adjust and trying to keep myself from freaking out. I made my way downstairs one step at a time and moving very slow so I don't trip. I made a mental note to remind my dad to put a light or something over the stairs. I got to the last 3 steps, and I could see the light switch on the wall in front of me to light up that hallway into the living room. Since I have been in the complete dark for a few minutes now, I couldn't keep my brain from freaking out, so I jumped to the switch and flipped it on. With a wave of relief, the hallway lit up like they were floodlights. When the lights lit up, I heard glass shattering and multiple bangs. I froze in terror and let out a shriek. I heard footsteps. The footsteps sounded to be coming from the kitchen. My heart pounding in my ears and still frozen from sheer terror, I couldn't help but listen to the steps. I could hear the creaking of the hardwood floor. It was getting closer to the hallway I was in. Adrenaline started to wash over my body. I kept frozen, trying not to let this thing know I'm here. I stared at the end of the hall, waiting, listening. The footsteps were close now to the end of the hallway. I watched and waited to see what was about to come around the corner. I saw what looked like a hand but was much larger and lengthier grab the corner of the wall. Its fingers were long with sharp nails. The hand was a brown-gray with cuts and dirt all over it. Still stuck in fear, I finally summoned the courage to rip my eyes off of that thing and run as fast as I could up the stairs. A near-piercing scream came from the thing in the hallway. I winced at the screech it gave out and held my ears with my hands to block the noise. I kept fumbling up the stairs and finally made it to the top. I was consumed with fear again as it started to run after me up the stairs. I was out of breath just from anxiety and fear. I hurled my way to my room running with all my might. The hallway going by me as I reached my door. I knew that wretched thing was behind me ripping its way down the hall. I didn't dare look back and burst into my room and slammed the door behind me and locked it. It stopped at my door and sounded like it was sniffing the air. I kept quiet and didn't move. It scratched at my door as if it were studying it, trying to comprehend what I just saw. There is something in my house and I have to get out of here. I can't go out of the window because I'm on the second floor and I have no way of getting down. I moved quietly around my room to get my bat and listened for the creature outside of my door. I couldn't hear it breathing. I looked under my door to see down the hall and I could see its shadow on the wall from going down the stairs. I stood up and gathered myself to open the door. I cracked the door to peek again and stared for a few minutes and didn't hear or see anything. I walked silently down the hall. My heart pounding in my ears made it harder to hear for any sounds. I reached the corner and looked down the stairs to see. I was expecting to see whatever it is to be looking at me with hunger. I didn't see the creature. I made my way down the stairs. I went down the hallway toward the living room. My nerves were on edge. I couldn't believe I'm doing this. I walked through the living room quietly and doing my best not to be heard. I reached the entrance to the kitchen. It was dark except for the living room light that poured in. I could see the light switch on the wall before the kitchen. I need to turn that on to see. I made my way toward the switch, bat in hand, ready to swing at the first thing I saw. My breath getting shakier with every step. I got to the switch and flipped it. The lights came on and I heard something very large scurry into the other room and knock over a table. I am freaking out at this point. What in the fuck is in my house? I start to walk into the kitchen, shaking at this point and even more scared now. When I made it in the kitchen, I start to hear snarling coming from the other room. I stepped onto the hardwood floor that creaked and I heard the screech again and very fast footsteps coming to my direction. I turned and ran toward the living room and the stairs and headed for my room and heard the footsteps right behind me getting closer. I hid behind the corner of the living room next to the doorway so the creature couldn't see me when it ran by. It ran into the living room and stopped to smell the air. That's when I saw all of it. A freakishly tall being, its head almost touched the ceiling if it wasn't hunched over. Its back legs were smaller than its arms. Its two front arms were long as the body and hanging from its arms was exposed to muscle and sinew. The smell that emits from it was vulgar and rotten. The creature's back were to me. I couldn't see its face and I didn't want to. I would go crazy if I saw its face. What seemed like hours was only minutes. I closed my eyes. I couldn't bear looking at anymore. I could hear it breathing heavily. I heard the footsteps start to walk away slowly, then they stopped. I heard my parents' car pull into the driveway. I heard whatever that thing was scurry again and I was worried that it might go after my parents. I opened my eyes and see that repulsive thing turn toward the doorway. I knew it would see me. I gripped the bat and stepped out and swung as hard as I could for the face of the creature. Knowing how tall it was, I angled the bat high and hoped to God I would stun this thing to give me a chance to run. As I swung, it looked at me. I have never felt terror and hopelessness in my life until that moment. It had the face of a deformed man. Its lower jaw looked dislocated, the face had tendons and sinew hanging off of it. The eyes were the worst part. It had black holes where the eyes should be, but instead of eyes, it had little yellow eyes like the sun in the middle of space. The bat connected to the side of its head and the creature howled and fell backward. Stunned, I fell to the floor and watched as the creature howled and scrambled on the floor. My senses came back and I quickly got to my feet and ran toward the door to our driveway. I burst out the door running toward my parents, gasping for air and yelling at them to get back in the car. I got to my dad and ran into his arms frantically telling him there is something in the house. My dad looked at my mum with concern. He told my mum to sit in the car with me with the doors locked. I pleaded with him not to go in. He told me it was gonna be okay and walked toward the house. I sat in the car with my mum, my eyes glued to house watching him. I'm thinking I'm gonna lose my dad to that beast in there. I saw lights turn on in the house all over. I could see my dad walking through the house through the windows. After a while, he came back out, with a confused face. He walked up to the car and told us to step out. The house looks a mess. What happened? My dad exclaimed. I told him the whole story with tears rolling down my cheeks. I could tell he tried to believe, but things I just saw an animal and that's all. Being home alone playing with my mind and made me see what I wanted to see. I didn't care what he thought. The proof was in the house, something was in the house with me regardless. My dad called the cops and they came out and looked. The cops said it definitely looked like an animal broke in and that I was lucky to have not been hurt. They did tell my dad something creepy. The cops said to my dad, the only thing we can't explain is that there were little remnants of tendons, sinew, and muscle all over the house. We can't explain where they came from since there isn't any carcass or blood from the animal or whatever the animal maybe could have eaten. My dad looked at me and then replied to the officer, strange, but is it gone whatever it was? The officer replied, yes, we searched the whole house and found nothing, you should be safe. Maybe want to put up a fence or an alarm system to scare them off when the alarm sounds. An hour or two later everything was calmed down and my parents were in bed and I was back in my room. After this horrifying night I couldn't sleep, so I watched TV in my room and tried to relax. I looked around my room to see if the thing came in here, but seems it didn't. I looked over to my window and saw my book at the bottom of the window. I got out of bed to pick it up. I bent down and saw it was opened and looked at the page it was opened on. I stared in disbelief of what I was reading. At the top of the page and it said Wendigo. I looked up from the book, looked out into the darkness and stared at the tree line and saw two beady yellow eyes staring back. Hello, friends. Why do men buy electric lawn mowers? So they can find their way back to the house. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. When I was 8 years old, both of my parents worked full-time. My dad was predominantly on the third shift at his job, and my mum was an elementary school teacher. We lived literally right up the road from my grandparents in a very small town. It was getting close to my 9th birthday when I contracted strep throat and scarlet fever. I was severely sick, could barely speak, had the first case of cold sweats that I remember in my life, and could barely pull myself out of bed to even use the restroom. I was absolutely miserable, and of course, being as young as I was, I didn't take the pain very well. My poor mother was at a loss of what to do with her working and my dad needing to use daylight hours to sleep. The first day I was sick, perhaps it was a Tuesday. My birthday would fall on a Friday. My dad stayed up most of the day with me, made me food, let me sleep in his lap on the couch, wiped my forehead down, made sure I took my medicine, etc. But on the second day, my grandmother had called and offered to let me stay at her house so my dad could sleep. He said yes and woke me up round 7 that morning to drive me up to her home. My grandfather also worked at this time too, so he was already gone to work when I arrived there. I don't remember too much of the early morning. I probably just slept in my grandmother's bed, tossing and turning when I'd wake up feeling extra bad. She encouraged me to swallow my awful tasting medicine, a little more gently than my dad did. She did fix me some tomato soup to try and eat, and it was the first time since I'd gotten sick that I had an appetite. I should mention my grandmother had this cute Yorkshire Terrier named Samson. He was very docile, not like the usual annoying, barking all the time terriers. Samson came into the room and curled up next to me as I dozed. I do know when I woke up at some point, it had to be the early afternoon, lunchtime, because I could hear the TV faintly from the living room on some game show. My grandmother had a ritual of eating her lunch while watching a game show. I think it was The Price is Right. I was trying to fall back asleep because I had gotten this really bad headache, maybe from dehydration. I was on the verge of sleep when I was jolted awake by the Samson yelp that erupted from the living room. The terrier curled up next to my feet perked up, but didn't move. I knew I had heard his name being called too, but it was odd he didn't respond. Samson. My grandmother called again. Samson. Samson. The dog still didn't run out of the room to her. I was confused, as he was so obedient to my grandmother. He was almost frozen, staring at the cracked open door but making no attempt to go to her. She called Samson. Maybe 3 or 4 more times. Then I got annoyed. I remember flinging the covers off of me. Of course, my clothes are sticky with sweat and I just generally feel uncomfortable and groggy. I stumble out of the room wiping my eyes, asking Grandma, "Do you need Samson? He's in your room with me." I'm in the living room and I have to do a double take. The TV is still on and blaring. There's a bowl of soup sitting on the coffee table and an opened Pepsi next to it, but my grandmother isn't anywhere in the room. Maybe she's in the bathroom? I crossed the room and went past the kitchen, empty too. I got to the bathroom door which was shut and knocked. Nothing. I then opened it. No one was in there. The house is empty. It's not a huge house either. I've covered all of the rooms. So yes, my first reaction was to get scared. I could clearly hear my grandmother calling for the dog, but she's not anywhere inside. I can feel my hands and feet get all tingly. I start shouting for my grandma, but my voice is just echoing through the small, cramped home. Samson had gotten up at this point and was sitting near the couch, looking completely undisturbed. I fumbled for the remote and turned the TV off, and yelled, more like wheezed, to the top of my lungs, which you can imagine how painful this was with a scratchy, infected throat, "Grandma." The worst part happened next. I heard her shouting my name back, clear as ever, like she was standing only feet away. I start crying now, scared out of my mind. I feel like maybe it has to be a ghost. I grew up with scary ghost stories courtesy of my dad, and I'm convinced now I'm in the room with a ghost. And then she, whatever this was, proceeded to call my name again. Then, there was a second voice, definitely not my grandmother's. It was deeper, definitely more masculine, and absolutely terrifying as it shouted, "Come to the front door." I did not do that. Instead, I made sure to run back to my grandparents' bedroom, lock the door, and pick up the telephone on their nightstand. I called my own home phone and my dad's sleepy voice answered. Through a barely comprehensible voice, I managed to croak something like, "Daddy, there's someone in the house and I can't find Grandma. She's gone." My dad, of course, said he jumped out of bed, grabbed his Swiss Army knife he kept in a drawer next to the bed, and ran down the road to the house in his PJs and bare feet. He ran up to the front door, jiggled the handle. It was locked. So he made his way around, and since he knew the garage code, just punched it in and got inside. A quick sweep of the 3 rooms of the home showed no one was in there. It's not like there was really anywhere to hide. I ran out of the room once I was sure he was there and began bawling in his arms. He kept reassuring me there was no one here, and then asked if I did know where Grandma possibly was. I said I hadn't, and explained I'd woken up to her calling for Samson, but she hadn't been anywhere there. This was back when cell phones were definitely around, but there were no iPhones, and my grandparents certainly wouldn't have been buying them anyway. My dad had one, but not on him at the time. I could tell he was trying to keep calm, so he just said we would need to go back to our house. I was sure he was probably going to call the police at that point, just because my grandma still hadn't popped up and her car had been in the garage when he got in. If she left, she'd gone on foot. We hadn't even made 2 steps out of the driveway when from my grandma's neighbor's house, my grandma was strolling out, chatting to the neighbor. She saw my dad and then me, crying my eyes out, and immediately ran over to see what was wrong. She was super apologetic. She said she'd stepped out right when she'd heated up her soup to go see her neighbor, who'd called about looking at something my grandma was going to buy. My grandma had figured I was asleep and she'd only be gone for 10 or 15 minutes. At first, people may have assumed I was feverish, therefore delusional, but I still stand by what happened. I know for a fact I was definitely alone in the house, save for Samson, but the voices I heard were real. For a while, I was hesitant to go back to my grandma's house because this happened in the middle of the day. I later read stories at school about Wendigos or creatures that would disguise their voices to lure people. This was the closest explanation I could ever form about what I heard. I never shared with anyone that I thought it was for sure a Wendigo and chalked it up to maybe just a ghost. I'm close to my 20s now. Last year was the first time I shared this story fully to my grandpa, who used to just say the fever must have made me had bad dreams. We were sitting on the front porch of the house, smoking cigarettes and exchanging anecdotes. When I finished telling him, for the first time he looked sort of disturbed about it. He finally put his cigarette out and just stared out into the road. Then he cleared his throat and looked over at me. "You know," he said slowly, "some funny things used to happen around that time. In the middle of the night, I'd wake up to take a piss or something. When I'd first sit up in the bed, I could hear your grandma sleeping away, snoring." He chuckled, but his face grew serious again. "Anyways, I'd always hear her calling for the dog." I tried to look calm, but my voice still shook when I asked him even when she was sleeping. "Sleep talking?" "No." He shook his head. "I heard her calling from outside, maybe the living room. I dunno, honey. She'd call for the dog, she'd call my name. All while she was really sleeping next to me, sleeping like a baby." "Have you ever told anyone?" "No, I don't wanna scare her. She's really scared of ideas like ghosts and stuff. That's why when you were younger and that thing happened, I told her just to remember you'd been sick, fever and all. Probably having nightmares." He looked gravely at me. "Don't repeat this to her, please, honey. She's really not the type to be scaring." Of course, I wanted to cry. I had this itchy, creepy feeling suddenly about being at the house. "Grandpa, do you still hear it sometimes?" "Oh yes." He was now reaching into his breast pocket to get out another cigarette. "Every night, but you just gotta remember not to do what it says. Even the dog figured it out. If it says to come to the door, you stay away from the door." If it says, I dunno, come here, you just stay still in the room until it quits calling. With that, he asked to borrow my lighter again. Hello, my friends. What has ears but cannot hear? A cornfield. Be sure to subscribe to my channel. Alright, where to start? I should probably start with who I am. My name is Jack and I'm a Wendigo. I'm not a normal one though. It'll be easier to explain in story form, so, I guess that's where we're going. Fake names for the discretion, of course. I was walking home from a friend's house when it all started. It was roughly 7 p.m. in the middle of winter, so it was rather dark, and I was walking past this white van. Bad idea, I know, but it was a foreign electric company, so I wasn't that worried. Boy, can you guess how surprised I was when I was pulled into the van? The person quickly overpowered me and put an arm around me to close up my arms, and covered my mouth with a hand. The person then faced me and unwrapped the arm to make an SHH motion, and she looked so scared. I nodded to show that I was good, and she released me. The woman in question looked like somebody out of an anime, long blue hair, rather pale skin, pointy, protruding ears like an elf, and full plate armor, complete with shield and sword. We waited what felt like hours, but it was only about 5 minutes before she spoke to me. What are you doing out so late? She asked. I'm out and about this late almost every day. This is the time when I have to go home from Chase House, I replied. Well, you picked a bad month to go there. How so? The geezers migrated. What the heck is a gay isle? I asked. Trust me, you don't wanna know. One thing's for sure though, you shouldn't go to your friend's house for a few years. Years. Yes, and keep your voice down, you might draw it back. And what's this it? One of your geisels? Yes, wait, down. She hissed. No, I have no reason to believe you. For all I know you're waiting for your partner in crime to make it even easier to kidnap me. I'm out of here, I said, before opening the door, jumping out, and running a grand total of 3 feet before being lifted into the air by some chittering monstrosity behind me. I knew before it turned me around that this wasn't just some weird machine, but one of the lady's geisels. I didn't even bother crying for help. I knew that none would come and that this was my fault in the first place. Then I heard an already familiar voice shout, "Hold still." And I have never been happier to hear the voice of a kidnapper, albeit I had never heard one before, but still. When I looked at her, she didn't have any weapons out like I thought she would, but rather, a weird portal thing. Despite the fact that the mouth of the geisel was only a foot away now, and that I should probably be more focused on trying to escape, I couldn't look away from this beautiful home, looking into space. Then I saw something that would save my life, over and over again. I shifted. I saw a spray yellow-green. I heard the paint screeches of the prey. I was feasting on its still warm body. Then I was interrupted. The woman, Leal, was calling my name. When had we told each other our names? Then I was shrinking, growing less hungry. Then I was back, still hungry, but back. What the fuck just happened? I asked, still dripping with green goop around my mouth. She looked even more serious than usual. Then she drew her sword and it started glowing. It was faint, but the sword was glowing, shield as well. Whoa lady, I have no idea what just happened, so put the weapons away, and let's be civil about this. Then she looked shocked, and I could smell fear on her. Since when could I smell people's weird fear juices? Thinking about humans as a separate species was nothing new, but being able to smell them, something weird was going on, and I could tell she had some answers. "You really have no idea what just happened?" said the woman. "No, Leal. No. That's what I want you to tell me." "Alright, I just need a moment to collect my thoughts." "Make it fast, I have to carry on home in right now." "Alright, I don't want to get caught, so go home, and meet me here tomorrow at noon." "I have school tomorrow. How about 4 in the afternoon?" "Fine. Goodbye, for now," she said before getting into her van and driving away. "Tomorrow's going to be hectic." "Alright, where did we leave off last time?" "Oh right. Leal driving off and I was walking into the distance, also known as my house. On to the story. After I got home from that strange encounter, I went into the bathroom to clean the goop off my face, and it was a good thing that I didn't stop to take my shoes too, as my mom turned the corner just as I went into the cover of the bathroom. I was able to get a cloth wet and start washing before she got close enough to hear the very early noise of water, and she asked me, "So, what took you so long?" I lost track of time, and accidentally stayed past 7, but I'm here now, so no harm is done. "Alright, as long as you have a good reason for being so late, you're okay. Love you." "Love you too, Mom." After I finished cleaning, I flushed and washed the cloth before tossing it in the laundry bin. After I got to my room, I promptly collapsed into a dreamless sleep. The next day went by as normal, and I thought the events of the previous day were all just a dream. Shape-shifting, elves, giant indescribable beasts. There was no way they could all exist, except for maybe the elves. It was all a dream, right? Right. As the day passed and I was slogging through the end of school, I had noticed something that brought all my preconceptions of the world crashing down. It may have seemed unimportant to anybody who saw it, but, to me, it was earth-shattering. I only knew about it at the end of the day, during some group work in math. One of the people in my group pointed out some green goop on the slope of my nose, close enough, and small enough for me to pose it as some stray gland, so I just wiped it off, and put it in my pocket. Nobody noticed, which was nice as well, considering I was the outcast of the grade and this would have added to the ridicule. I didn't care much about it, but it could get pretty annoying at times. Once class was over, I went to the bathroom and confirmed my suspicions. It wasn't an eye booger. It was some dried geisel blood. My relaxing plans to sleep for the rest of the day. I had an elf to interrogate. Took you long enough. Not my fault, I had some difficult homework. Fair enough, I guess you're going to want some answers, right? Correct, I replied. It had taken me an extra half hour before I could get to the meeting point, but it was true that I had some difficult work to do. It was made harder as I was still in a small amount of shock from my realization. So then, how? How what? That thing I did yesterday. I want to know how and why. You shifted. How? Geez, don't yell. You might draw a geisel. It's a guarantee that one is nearby due to the death of its fellow, and the how? There are 2 reasons. The first stimulus was the stress from being in a near-death situation. The second was my revealer. I had suspected there was something strange about you when I pulled you into the van, and by suspect I mean felt. If you understand what I mean by that, then congratulations, you have some mental capacity. She said, not bothering to hide her condescending tone. Hey, don't look so much down on me just because I'm younger. I can apparently handle myself in situations like yesterday. And second, what is a revealer? I questioned, wondering why this woman was so annoying. A revealer works in a rather simple way. It only works with those that can shift, like you and Lickans. What it does is it forces the true form out. I was unsure it would work as your other form seemed to be buried rather deep. Speaking of, how can a Wendigo be so, you? She answered. Whoa. A Wendigo? I'm not exactly a giant cannibalistic beast, and I've never eaten human. And even if I had somehow eaten some, then it would have been a small amount. So how can I be a Wendigo? I asked. I have no idea. I was hoping you could answer that for me. But I have worked out a hypothesis. Something you've been eating has had large amounts of human flesh, but not enough to fully bring out a Wendigo, and even then not all who eat flesh becomes a Wendigo, in small amounts at least. So you drew a short straw while eating something contaminated, but it was close and you only ended up having the ability to shift as a survival instinct, and a buried one at that. And with it probably would have come urges and enhanced sense and abilities. Any sign of those? She explained. Yes, and yes. So I'm guessing it's all waking up now that I've shifted? Yes. And if you want to not turn into a nearly mindless beast, then we should give you training to control it, which would need time. Is there any way you could meet with me regularly so that we can practice your control? She asked. Yes, but only if we can get my friend involved. I don't want to due to the obvious and less so dangers. But, my plan would need him to work. May I inquire what this plan of yours is? Yes, it's similar to what's happening now. I ask if I can go to his house, then I meet up with you and we train. But to keep him from asking at my place, we'll need him with us, so that his mum isn't suspicious either. Alright? I explained. Alright, try and work things out with your friend, and if all goes according to plan we can start tomorrow. Meet me here at the same time every possible day. She responded, before once again climbing into her van and driving off to wherever it is she spends her time. Now then, to speak with Chase.